At 8 a.m. on June 7, 1917, Commander Gordon Campbell stood on the bridge of the tramp steamer HMS Pargust, watching through his binoculars as a white wake traced through the Atlantic waves 500 yards to port. A torpedo. He had exactly 12 seconds to decide, turn away and survive, or hold course and spring the trap. Campbell ordered the helmsman to maintain heading. The torpedo struck Pargust amidships with a thunderous explosion, killing Petty Officer Isaac Radford instantly and flooding the engine room. The German submarine commander watching through his periscope saw exactly what he expected, a defenseless merchant ship, mortally wounded, crew abandoning in panic. What he didn't see were the 4 concealed 12-pounder naval guns, the hidden 4-inch gun under a false cargo hatch, and the 73 Royal Navy sailors lying flat on the deck, waiting for the order to fire. This was the 3rd time in 5 months that Campbell had deliberately allowed his ship to be torpedoed. The first 2 times, he had destroyed U-boats. The Germans had begun calling him Der Teufel, the devil. The concept of the Q-ship had emerged in 1915 as Britain faced catastrophic losses in the Atlantic. German U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than Britain could build them. In that year alone, submarines destroyed 885,000 tons of Allied shipping. Traditional naval tactics were useless. Destroyers couldn't catch submarines that dove before they arrived, and depth charges were still experimental. The U-boats operated with impunity, surfacing to sink unarmed merchants with deck guns to conserve their expensive torpedoes. The British Admiralty's solution was audacious: convert ordinary merchant ships into heavily armed decoys. These vessels, codenamed Q-ships after their base at Queenstown, Ireland, would appear to be easy targets but were actually warships in disguise. The first Q-ships were commissioned in 1915, armed with concealed 4-inch and 12-pounder guns mounted behind collapsible bulwarks, dummy cargo, and false deckhouses. The crews wore civilian clothing and were trained to act like merchant seamen. The tactic's success depended entirely on deception. A Q-ship would sail alone through U-boat hunting grounds, appearing vulnerable and slow. When a submarine surfaced to attack with its deck gun, the Q-ship would maintain the illusion until the U-boat was at point-blank range. Then the panels would drop, the white ensign would be raised, and the hidden guns would open fire. The first successful Q-ship attack came on July 24, 1915, when HMS Prince Charles sank U-36. But by 1917, German submarine commanders had grown suspicious. They observed merchant ships from greater distances, fired torpedoes without surfacing, and avoided vessels that appeared too tempting. The Q-ship program was failing. Of 366 Q-ships commissioned, only 14 U-boats had been confirmed destroyed, while 61 Q-ships had been sunk. The Admiralty was ready to abandon the concept when Commander Gordon Campbell proposed a modification that other officers called suicidal. Campbell's innovation was simple: don't avoid the torpedo. Allow the Q-ship to be hit, rely on buoyant cargo to keep it afloat, and use the damage to convince the U-boat commander that it was safe to surface and finish the ship with gunfire. This required filling the holds with cork, balsa wood, or empty steel drums to maintain buoyancy after flooding. It also required a crew willing to be torpedoed. Campbell found his crew among volunteers who knew exactly what they were signing up for. On February 17, 1917, Campbell took command of HMS Farnborough, a converted collier armed with 4 concealed guns. The ship was filled with 16,000 cubic feet of cork and fitted with reinforced bulkheads to contain flooding. Campbell drilled his crew relentlessly in panic party procedures. When torpedoed, a designated group would rush to the lifeboats in simulated panic, rowing away in apparent terror while the remaining crew lay hidden, manning the guns. At 9:45 a.m. on February 17, 1917, Farnborough was 140 miles southwest of Ireland when Campbell spotted a torpedo wake. He had seconds to react. Instead of turning away, he adjusted course slightly, just enough to ensure the torpedo struck aft of the engine room rather than directly on it. The explosion was massive. The stern settled low in the water, and smoke poured from the holds. The panic party launched the lifeboats convincingly, shouting and rowing away in disorder. German submarine U-83, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Bruno Hoppe, surfaced 400 yards away. Hoppe circled Farnborough cautiously, inspecting the lifeboats and the apparently abandoned ship. Through binoculars, he could see cargo scattered on deck, no signs of weapons, and the ship listing heavily. Convinced it was safe, U-83 closed to 100 yards to interrogate the lifeboat crew. It was the last mistake Hoppe would make. Campbell gave the order, "White ensign up. Open fire." The false panels dropped instantly. 4 guns opened fire simultaneously at a range where missing was impossible. Farnborough fired 45 shells in 3 minutes. The first salvo shredded U-83's conning tower. Subsequent hits punctured the pressure hull in multiple locations. Hoppe attempted to crash dive, but water poured through the damaged hull faster than the ballast tanks could flood. U-83 sank stern first in 90 seconds. 3 German sailors were pulled from the water. 41 drowned. Farnborough was badly damaged. The engine room was flooded, steering was lost, and the stern was settling deeper. Campbell ordered the crew to shift all movable weight forward to raise the stern. HMS Buttercup arrived 6 hours later and took Farnborough in tow. The ship reached port barely afloat and was declared a total loss. But Campbell had proven his concept. The Admiralty promoted him to commander and gave him another Q ship. Most of Farnborough's crew volunteered to follow him. Campbell's new command was HMS Pargust, formerly the Collier Victoria. The ship was larger than Farnborough, displacing 3,000 tons, and armed with a 4-inch gun concealed under a dummy lifeboat, 4 12-pounders, 2 torpedo tubes, and a depth charge thrower. The holds were packed with 16,772 empty steel flotation drums. Naval architects calculated that even if completely flooded with 25% of the drums crushed, Pargust's well decks would remain above water. She could survive being torpedoed twice. On June 7, 1917, Pargust was on patrol 90 miles off the Irish coast when submarine UC-29, commanded by Oberleutnant Ernst Rosenau, fired a torpedo at 8 a.m. The explosion killed Petty Officer Radford and severely damaged the engine room. But the torpedo also wrecked the mechanism that lowered the gun covers. If the covers fell prematurely, UC-29 would see the guns and dive immediately. Seaman William Williams, a Welsh reservist, physically held the 400-pound steel cover in place with his bare hands while the ship shuddered from the explosion. The panic party launched the lifeboats convincingly. Campbell remained on the bridge, lying flat, watching UC-29 through a crack in the canvas. Rosenau surfaced at periscope depth and circled for 30 minutes, inspecting every angle of the apparently abandoned steamer. The crew remained motionless, some lying in pools of water, others bleeding from minor injuries. Williams continued holding the gun cover, his arms shaking from the strain. Finally, at 8:36 a.m., UC-29 fully surfaced 50 yards from Pargust's starboard beam. Campbell shouted the order. Williams released the cover and dove aside as the 12-pounder swung out. All 4 guns and both torpedo tubes came to bear simultaneously. The first salvo struck UC-29's conning tower and pressure hull. Rosenau's crew attempted to man their deck gun, but the second salvo killed them. Desperate, Rosenau tried to submerge, but the damaged hull couldn't hold pressure. Some crew members jumped overboard with their hands raised. Campbell ordered ceasefire. But UC-29 continued moving, attempting to escape into the mist. Campbell instantly recognized the tactic, fake surrender to gain time. He ordered fire resumed. Pargust's guns fired 38 shells in 4 minutes. The final salvo struck UC-29's fuel tanks, and the submarine exploded in a massive fireball 300 yards away. Only 2 German sailors were recovered alive. Pargust was immobilized but afloat. HMS Crocus arrived 8 hours later and towed the crippled Q-ship to Queenstown. The Admiralty faced a unique problem: who should receive the Victoria Cross when the entire crew had acted with equal valor? Article 13 of the Victoria Cross warrant allowed for selection by ballot when individual acts couldn't be distinguished. The crew voted, with Campbell abstaining. Lieutenant Ronald Stewart, Campbell's executive officer, and Seaman William Williams, who had held the gun cover, were awarded the V.C. Campbell received his second Distinguished Service Order. 14 other crew members received medals. The German Navy's intelligence service analyzed the wreckage of UC-29 and issued a fleet-wide warning. British merchant ships were now heavily armed and would allow themselves to be torpedoed to lure U-boats close. But Campbell wasn't finished. Pargust was too damaged to repair, so he took command of HMS Dunraven, a 3,117-ton collier fitted with even more sophisticated disguises. The modifications included armored bridge, perforated pipes that could emit steam to simulate boiler damage, and 4 collapsible canvas railway trucks on deck to change the ship's appearance. Most of Pargust's crew volunteered to transfer. On August 8, 1917, Dunraven encountered UC-71 in the Bay of Biscay. The engagement followed the familiar pattern. UC-71 torpedoed Dunraven at 10:45 a.m. The panic party abandoned ship convincingly. But UC-71's commander, Oberleutnant Reinhold Salzwedel, was cautious. He had studied reports of Q-ships and suspected a trap. Instead of fully surfacing, UC-71 remained at periscope depth, circling at 800 yards, far beyond effective range of Dunraven's guns. Campbell faced an impossible decision: maintain the deception and hope the U-boat closed, or open fire prematurely and reveal his ship. Campbell held fire for 90 minutes. UC-71 fired a second torpedo at 12:20 p.m., striking Dunraven's stern. The explosion ignited ammunition stored in the aft magazine. Fire spread rapidly, and smoke obscured Campbell's view. Fearing the fire would detonate the main magazine and kill his crew, Campbell ordered the white ensign raised and opened fire at maximum range. UC-71 immediately crash-dived and escaped. Dunraven burned for 3 hours before HMS Christopher arrived and took off the crew. The Q-ship sank that evening. Campbell's officers nominated him for a second Victoria Cross, but he declined, insisting the crew deserved recognition. Lieutenant Charles Bonner and Petty Officer Ernest Pitcher were awarded the V.C. instead. In his report, Campbell wrote, "It was a fair and honest fight. The enemy commander was smarter than I was." The action with UC-71 marked the effective end of successful Q-ship operations. German submarine commanders now attacked from greater distances, used torpedoes exclusively, and avoided any ship showing suspicious characteristics. The final assessment of Q-ships was sobering. Of 366 vessels commissioned, 61 were sunk by U-boats. In 150 recorded engagements, only 14 submarines were confirmed destroyed and 60 damaged. The program diverted thousands of skilled sailors from other duties for marginal results. Minefields and depth charges proved far more effective. But the psychological impact was significant. German submarine commanders became more cautious, attacked from greater ranges, and wasted torpedoes on merchants that might have been sunk with gunfire. Gordon Campbell survived the war with 3 Victoria Crosses awarded to his crews, making him one of the most decorated naval officers of World War I. He commanded the battlecruiser HMS Tiger in the 1920s, served as naval aide-de-camp to King George V, and was elected Member of Parliament for Burnley in 1931. He died in 1953, and his medals sold at auction in 2017 for £840,000, a world record for British military medals. His memoir, My Mystery Ships, became a bestseller. The Q-ship concept was revived briefly in World War II, but with even less success. Modern U-boats attacked exclusively with torpedoes from long range, making the deception impossible. HMS Fidelity, the last operational Q-ship, was sunk by U-435 in December 1942 while escorting convoy ONS-154, taking 369 men with it. The era of the Q-ship ended where it began, with brave men in disguised ships, fighting an enemy they could barely see, in a war that demanded everything and rewarded nothing but survival.